Financial institutions are spending more than $20 billion a year just to understand the onslaught of new and changing regulations. IBM is working to transform regulatory compliance by applying cognitive capabilities to help organizations streamline the process of managing constantly changing regulations. Regulatory Compliance with Watson will directly address the massive strain on resources and dramatically reduce related costs. Meet Leroy, a lawyer for a global bank who finds himself buried in regulations. But rather than reading through thousands of pages line by line, these regulations are fed to Watson for initial analysis, and Leroy can simply ask Watson to show him the obligations on a specific topic or regulation. He can then just check Watson's work, an easier task that takes much less time. Leroy can then customize the obligations as needed, writing his own interpretation based on what it means to his firm. He can also see what jurisdictions, business lines, products, processes, and compliance themes the obligation is related to, and add his own tags that may be more meaningful to the people in his company. The next step is to indicate how material this obligation is to the different divisions in his organization. For example, while the UK and German units are doing a lot of trade initiation, Spain isn't as active. So Leroy identifies the obligation as low materiality. If needed, this step could be delegated to compliance officers within the individual divisions. Leroy notices that the next paragraph highlighted by Watson is actually guidance on how to address the obligation he just reviewed, and Watson allows him to easily label it as such. He can now see all the requirements and guidance for that particular obligation. Now the obligations, including the bank-specific context added by Leroy and his team, are now securely stored in a dedicated repository in the cloud. Enter Jeff, a compliance officer who's responsible for mapping controls to the newly identified obligations. Like anyone else, Jeff can ask Watson to search for and find all the obligations and controls relevant to his task. He quickly sees a list of all obligations for a particular regulation, and as he selects an obligation, Watson recommends potential existing controls that may be relevant. Jeff can also search for other existing controls, or he can create a new control objective. Once he's completed the mappings, the team has an enriched repository that identifies both the obligations and the controls that can be used to address those obligations. Next, we meet Catherine, the compliance officer for capital markets in Germany, who's been asked about the implications of moving more of the firm's trading activities to Frankfurt. She first asks Watson what controls are required for trading in Germany. Catherine is presented with a detailed list of all the relevant controls required and can filter through these further based on the type of control or look at controls specific to certain products, processes, or compliance themes. She can also ask Watson to compare the controls required for a new regulation, such as MiFID II, to those required for the original regulation. Based on Jeff's work to link controls to objectives, Catherine gets an immediate visual comparison of the control requirements, and she can drill in to see the net new controls required for MiFID II. She could also use this capability to analyze different and overlapping control requirements across similar regulations or across different jurisdictions. With Watson, changes to regulatory obligations can be tracked more effectively. Duplicative controls can be rationalized, costs are reduced, and questions from management, auditors, and regulators can be answered more quickly and easily. Welcome to the next generation of cognitive compliance. Learn more at ibm.com/regcompliance.